What's happening, everybody? Stray here. I wanted to take a little time today to talk about a game called Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon. It's a game that I think I first heard about quite a while ago, a year or more, as a first-person RPG that looked along the lines of something like from the Elder Scrolls series, Skyrim or Oblivion, I guess being the most familiar ones to me. While I've always sort of struggled to get into those games a little bit, they've always interested me as immersive as like a first-person RPG can be. It's often been the combat that's kind of been a turnoff to me, being too simplistic and hack and slash and kind of chaotic in first person. I always wanted something a little more deeper, I guess, coming from a background of action games, fighting games, with a little bit more control, variety, and cool stuff that you can do. So I've always been like looking for and waiting for a game like this, I guess, to sort of really be the one that pulls me in and gets me invested in it, unlike Skyrim even managed to do. I still would like to revisit Skyrim someday, but that's definitely a topic for another time. So coming back to Fall of Avalon, I think this got back on my radar recently. It has been in early access, like I said, for some time. I think a couple of years even, maybe. And it's just had its 1.0 release, I think, this past week. And so I caught wind of that, which sort of made me look it up again. And I was reminded, oh yeah, this game, I think I've seen this before. I've seen another game maybe in this kind of series, also called Tainted Grail, where it's kind of like King Arthur inspired, but with a very different sort of aesthetic and a sort of a dark, violent world, and a retelling of the King Arthur tale, I guess, through that lens. The other game in the series is kind of like a card game. I guess that's maybe not accurate. Or maybe it is. I haven't really played it that much. But it's kind of like a roguelike deck builder or something like that. I'm not sure if you're actually playing with cards or if it's more like units and stuff like that. I think I did try it very briefly in demo at some point. But games like that haven't really grabbed me either, so I didn't spend a great deal of time with it. But when this one came up and I looked it back up on Steam, I saw that it had a demo. I don't know how old the demo build is, considering it's probably not been updated recently if they've been pushing toward their 1.0 release and just hit that. So I don't know how outdated it is, but it definitely seemed like a pretty complete experience. But being available, I absolutely was keen to jump into that. I will say, while the game certainly looked great and, started off with more polish than I think I expected from what I expected to be, a pretty indie kind of experience. This is a complex genre for a smaller team or a smaller company to make. And so I was pretty impressed by like the visual and production quality, initially anyway. But I did end up with a pretty bad impression with it at first. Just the first night I had spent with it, maybe for like an hour or something like that. And the main reason for that was the combat, again, being kind of a sticking point for me for sort of different reasons in this game than in some others like Skyrim. It did seem like there was a little bit more depth here, but I started off with melee weapons. They teach you about the parry mechanic, as well as a dodge, but the parry just did not feel good to me. I didn't get it at first, and that left me like wide open just to get beaten down, basically, by enemies. I was getting clobbered at first because the dodge was on like the left alt key, and first of all, that was a little bit awkward for me, but the dodge really put a lot of space between you and the enemy, and it just felt like I was constantly kind of running away, and I wanted to stay in the enemy's face and sort of fight more competently. And I simply couldn't get the parry to trigger at all. I figured this out a little bit later, but the timing was just really tight, was my first thought. And I think that is true overall. And so that really wasn't working for me. More than that, you don't have to parry, there is a block, but having just a single-handed weapon to block with is pretty ineffective, and you take quite a bit of damage through everything. So the first couple of encounters like that, I was able to fight my way through and everything, but it simply just did not feel good at all. It felt quite frustrating. I wasn't able to play the way I wanted to, and that left a pretty bad taste in my mouth. But I gave it a little bit of time. I came back the next day. I think I frankly was a little bit tired the first night too, when I was trying to squeeze in a little bit of time to check it out. I came back to it, and I did try a little bit of a different build. As the demo kicks off, you get a few choices that kind of control, I guess, some of your stats and things like that. I don't think that's actually probably really that formative for the short demo period. I imagine the game starts that way and it's much more important in that context. But it at least got me thinking about how I wanted to play, whether I wanted to use like a sword and shield, a two-handed weapon, some magic, etc. And the second time around, rather than sticking purely with melee, because I knew there was sort of like this challenge with the parry system or the parry and block system, I did try some magic along with some melee. I always loved the idea of kind of like a spell sword or a battle mage in RPGs or especially in these kind of games. And oftentimes I don't find I can pull it off. So I was curious to try it here and see how it felt after the initial struggles. And whether it was the fatigue the day before or just kind of like not having figured the game out yet, I ended up with a far, far better impression of the game the second time around. And I think I even played 3 hours, maybe. The demo's pretty sizable, and I got the hang of it a little bit better. I got into it. I was taking time to read sort of the notes and talk to the characters around the initial prison area and like explore the nooks and crannies and the different paths that you can come across. And I was immediately far more into it than I had been the day before, and ended up kind of playing all the way through as much as I could, which I think took a good couple of hours at least. And specifically about the combat, like what clicked for me much better. First of all, I did rebind the dodge key. That was pretty big for me because, again, if you are struggling to parry or do not have the ability to block sufficiently, dodging is really important. And you can dodge a lot. Like my stamina was regenerating very quickly. You do have like a health, magic, and stamina resource, each separate. Both magic and stamina regenerate pretty quickly. And I'll get to magic in a second. That's one of the reasons the magic system is super cool. The stamina system, while it limits your attacking and your movement, it regenerates very quickly. And so I was able to dodge. And once I had that on a key that was a bit more natural and accessible to me, it was much easier to dance around my opponents, even if I felt like I couldn't try a parry or a block. And so that really helped. Adding to that was the magic that I sort of wove in to the build a little bit. You get sort of like one of each weapon, like a single-handed weapon, a two-handed weapon, a magic spell, a shield. You get each of these, a bow as well. You can get a bow. I didn't really try the bow too much, but it pops into mind now. It is one of the options. You get each one of those sort of early on in the demo to try, and you can try them all out, or focus on the ones that you're interested in. And doing more dodging did put more distance between myself and the enemy, but leveraging that fire spell that is accessible early on allowed me to strike from range. And I found that the magic resource, like the mana or whatever it is that governs your spell casting, not only is it separate from your stamina, so you're not consuming it when you're dodging or striking with melee, it also regenerates on its own and pretty quickly. You don't have to use potions. You don't have to wait and rest. It will regenerate itself naturally and fairly quickly. I don't know what controls that, if there are stats, equipment, or other things that can make that faster or slower. But it was really cool to be able to do that and use the spells frequently. And certainly between fights, your resources pretty much completely refilled. So I didn't feel so limited by that. And it was really fun to just be able to let loose. So I was avoiding damage. I was being able to strike in sort of different ways and fun ways. It felt really good. I could set the enemies on fire. There were status effects, all the usual kind of things you'd expect, but like it felt good, which is so important, right? And then I kind of figured out the parry. And I think the game doesn't save the tutorial messages that it shows you. At least the demo version didn't. It doesn't save those anywhere in like the journal or the menus. And so I was trying to look those back up. Did I read this right? What were the details here again? Like when I couldn't get the parry working. And I think what I had misinterpreted or not fully appreciated at first is that the parry requires you to commit. You cannot like hold block and try to start holding it at the last moment and trigger a parry instead and then block if you miss the parry. No, you have to like commit to the parry. So you got to tap. You got to tap block right at the moment like an attack would hit you. If you don't tap and you hold instead, which is what I'm sure I was doing initially, it will not work, even if your timing is like correct, or so I found. And so I started getting the parry a lot more when I was committing to it and tapping. And it is risky. You can take damage, but you can try a parry. And if you hit it, great. If you miss it, you can start becoming a little more defensive for a little while you take some food or something and start gradually healing up. So that started to feel a lot better. I will say the timing on it still is really pretty tight. And so don't expect to maybe be doing that like super safely. I find the same thing in like a Dark Souls. The parry is really fun. It can be very beneficial, but it's really risky. And the timing isn't easy. It can depend on the attack and is just generally tight. And here it might feel even tighter than almost anything I've played in quite a while, frankly. And I play a lot of like Souls-like or action games like that with parries. Many of them recently have been pretty generous about this. And this one definitely feels different. Looking at the skill tree, which you can see later, I think toward the end of the demo, or maybe at any time, I don't remember, and I just looked at it later. There are skills that can make your parry better and easier, along with a myriad other things, of course. And so that might be something to invest in if you want to do a lot of melee and stuff like that, because melee did seem like fairly straightforward. You're hacking and slashing, blocking and parrying, and some of the different moves, if there are ones you can unlock, would add some depth and fun to that maybe. So that could make it easier, but it definitely felt tough right off the bat. I think spellcasting and everything seemed like a wonderful thing to have like diversification into and everything. So I'm pretty sure if and when I come back to this, I want to do some of both. And I didn't really try like the ranged attacks, but there is a stealth system very similar to what I've experienced in the past with Elder Scrolls, where you can get like sneak attack damage and stuff like that, I think. And so that could be a lot of fun with the bow and arrow, but I did not really try that in the short time that I spent with this so far. So I left with a way better impression, specifically about the combat than I did initially. And that was really wonderful, because at first it seemed like, boy, did they even play this game? Like, how is this like this? I'm just not getting it. And so I was glad to rectify that. Next up, I had a few other things on the list that I wanted to chat about. Only one of them is probably more sizable, but the first is the art style. I've already mentioned a little bit about what this Tainted Grail series is. I don't know exactly what the inspiration for it is other than the original King Arthur stories, but like the marrying of this sort of dark, gruesome, bloody, gory art style is with the King Arthur sort of lore. I will say generally it's not my kind of thing. Like, I'm not super into like horror, blood and guts and everything. And I was a little concerned about that, I guess. But I would say enough other stuff was so positive. It really didn't take away from the experience for me. And it's also quite unique. Combination of these two things, like the King Arthur story that I'm sort of familiar with, and this much darker undertone, which is a lot like some other games I play, but again, a little bit more like gruesome and bloody. So I was being pulled along by everything else enough, but I could see this being a problem, at least for me personally, if the game sort of takes it, maybe even handles it like this consistently, but certainly if it sort of takes it up a notch or does any other kind of like weird stuff that I'm not a super big fan of. So we'll see. But I thought all like the armor, equipment, so many of the characters, all this stuff looks really great and everything. I thought there was like a really nice ambience and overall style to things, even in some of the ways that are usually not my thing and sort of pushing me out of my comfort zone a little. There's almost like an H.R. Geiger influence here too in some of the architecture. Not all of it. I guess like the man-made architecture looks different, but there are some other areas. I don't know what their origin is supposed to be, but like they have sort of fantastical purpose, and they have this kind of like H.R. Geiger look to them, sort of like an alien, almost like organic living sort of texture and architecture. So that's a unique factor here, and one that kind of has like a mixed positive or a mixed effect on this overall picture for me. Some things I really liked about it, some things I'm a little unsure about, but also kind of appreciate the difference of. So have to see where that goes, but it's definitely a standout element of the game. Really quick call out as well to like the main musical theme. Overall, the music and sound design for the game seemed pretty good. Nothing really stood out to me, but except for like the main menu theme, which is very noticeable. Chanting, deep rhythmic, sort of like Norse mythology theme and sound and everything like that. It's very, very cool. Really stands out, and they bring it back in the game, sort of at like a suitable moments. And throughout the full game, it may appear again or something. So that's a really cool element. The other big part that I wanted to chat about here was sort of the level design. The demo takes place almost entirely in kind of this prison area where you start out, and I won't go into the story too much. There are some elements there I think are really interesting. I will touch on those. But the level design of this area, it's a familiar sort of locale to start one of these games, right? I mean, I think it's Oblivion, I think specifically, or maybe it's literally every Elder Scrolls game. I don't know if that's a theme where you always start like in prison, but I think I remember Oblivion, you start basically in prison. And now that I think about it, I think Skyrim is similar. Like you're on a like cart being taken to your execution, this kind of thing. So it's sort of a thematic, I guess, callback or convention maybe. So that's kind of cool as well. But the layout of this area is pretty neat. It starts off fairly simple, but it actually gets quite expansive and varied. And there are sort of multiple paths, and they loop around and connect to each other. There are some elements that are almost like a Dark Souls, where you'll go off on a separate path for a while, end up in kind of like the under basement of this dungeon, meet a really cool character who happens to be lurking down there that you've heard about in like some notes and stuff that you've picked up, who's significant for one reason in particular. And then you end up like at an elevator, and it takes you back up to a door that you couldn't get into before at an area you passed through previously, and it feels very connected and natural, and like there's a lot to explore, even though you can also like know it and learn it like by exploring fairly easily. So I think that's a really good sign. I'm curious if the rest of the game is more open, more outdoors, or if there will be other places like this, or if they can bring those themes and strengths to outdoor areas and other areas in the game just as well. But there's some cool stuff. There are a couple cool areas, more than a couple even, that you don't really need to go to. There are things to find there. There are cool like characters. There are special enemies or bosses or sub bosses to fight. There are items that they have. Rings in particular are some special ones that you can find that have really nice abilities that you could miss easily if you're not sort of being thorough. So I think that's a really good sign for some stuff I like. I'd really like to see in a game like this. Now, the story, I basically know nothing about really, but in the bit I experienced, it grabbed me actually quite a bit. You are just sort of an every person. I don't know if there's anything special sort of about the player character. I guess there is, which I sort of won't reveal. You do see some elements of that in the demo, whether that's because of innate powers you have or just because of happenstance and where you happen to be and what happens to you. I don't know. But there are absolutely some interesting sort of questions and things that were pulling me along and made me want to kind of go into the main game right away and find out sort of the answers to those questions and where these mysteries go. There are also some cool characters, and those cool characters lead to a pretty big, like the impression of a pretty big central choice that may be key to the game, may lead to multiple endings, may lead to sort of like two sides of a conflict. There could be more sides as well, but at least a couple of big ones that I would definitely like to see sort of where that goes. I think it could lose me, or it could turn out really well, but I think that kind of hook early is something that they really want to nail in a game like this. And I think they kind of did. I definitely wanted to sort of keep playing, even though I feel right now I've got some other stuff on the list and just not a lot of room for this. Beyond that, there are definitely hints, introductions to the basics of like a number of gameplay systems, cooking for healing and buffs, alchemy for potions. It's kind of like instant healing, and maybe other effects like in combat when you really need to heal like a chunk and you can't heal over time. The skill trees are a little bit unusual, I guess, and You know what? It reminds me of Skyrim, I guess, where there's kind of those constellations, and they're all sort of each skill tree is a separate constellation, and none of them individually are like that particularly complex. Maybe there are a couple of branches of different skills and paths to follow, but if you just look at the whole of them, there's quite a bit of flexibility in what you want to focus on. And that's the same kind of thing here. It was organized very similarly, and it looked like there were quite a lot of choices and stuff. So it seemed like there were different ways to play, and ways within those that you would need to focus your progress in to really excel and get stronger in those areas. And probably is going to be less effective for you to diversify. But that's sort of conjecture at this point and everything. It just looked like there was a good amount of like stuff to try and options to consider. So overall, I did a huge 180 from my sort of first impression of the game. And that was really just exciting. It's always wonderful to have another game to add to the list. It looks really cool, and like something new, at least for me, maybe to kind of experience. As I say, I think this has been out for a little while, and now the 1.0 release is out. It already looks like it has quite a few Steam reviews that are really positive. And I think those have been continuing to grow since the release. I haven't been following too much in the last few days or anything around the specifics there, because I know I can't jump into it right now, and I want to come back to it when the time is right, get excited about it then. But I'm sure there's tons of other information out there about the game that you may have already seen or can certainly seek out if you think this looks interesting. So definitely encourage you to do that. If so, for me, this will absolutely go on my never-ending list of things that I want to come back to and check out. I'm always still catching up given the limited amount of time I've got to play with things these days, and I just have some other stuff on my list in the immediate future I think that I want to finally get to, especially with some sequels that are coming out later this year or next year, and so on. So this is another, I think, independently developed. I don't think I know this developer specifically. We need to go research a little bit more, which I will leave to you to do if you are interested. But it's not really like a big budget AAA game, even though it is an ambitious project and an ambitious genre, I think, to be working in as a developer. So it seems like they've done a really cool job. No idea, I guess, how big the game is, how much content it is, but everything I've heard actually indicates it's pretty big. So cool surprise. And this is one that kind of was on my list or on my radar like a couple of years ago, maybe coming into early access, and has grown hugely since then. So it's really cool and exciting to see that they've seemingly done a really good job with it and made something cool. So I look forward to revisiting this one someday. Check it out if you think it sounds cool. And until next time, take care.